And coming up next, something that is near and dear to the hearts of a lot of younger people and even some older people. TikTok's U.S. future is hanging by a thread. With the app's nationwide ban deadline looming on September the 5th, ByteDance is attempting a last-ditch split, launching a U.S.-only M2 version of TikTok amid mounting political and legal pressure. Hi again, this is John Mounts, and this is Viewpoint Alabama on the Alabama Radio Network. Joining me now to talk about the future of this popular social media app is Sam Raus. Sam is a David Boaz resident writing fellow at Young Voices and a political analyst and public relations professional. Sam, welcome to Viewpoint.
Thank you so much for having me on this morning.
Sam, everybody I know is on TikTok. I'm on TikTok. The president who's sitting in the White House right now, I'm not saying that TikTok got him there, but without TikTok, he probably would not have won the presidential election quite so handily. And yet it's possible that it could go away. How is that a possibility? And do we want that to happen?
Over the past year, there was heavy negotiations with regards to concerning connections between TikTok and it being, based in China, being connected to Chinese businesses and the CCP, what that meant for American national security. And so Congress passed legislation forcing the company to divest to to companies that are not owned by China or other adversaries in a certain time frame. Otherwise, it would face a ban. But after the election, we saw that Trump was much more supportive of TikTok than the Republican side of the aisle initially had been, and ultimately has been giving it a bit of a pause based off of certain framework within the legislation that the executive can exercise some discretion over. There's legal questions around all of that. And so it's been sitting in the wakes, questions around whether or not some sort of deal will be reached, what the future of it holds is really uncertain right now.
Now, even if they were to divest and say another company that is not controlled by the Chinese, and I don't know that the Chinese government outright owns ByteDance, but essentially they have input because it's a company in China. And we had another company that say was US based. There's no guarantee that that US based company couldn't still be gathering information and using it for nefarious purposes, is there?
No, I think that the question at the end of the day is not necessarily about gathering data, as all social media platforms, as search engines, now AI, do in order to give us the content and information that we want and best serve us as customers. The question is around, one, access to secure personal information and what that means when it's in the hands of external powers, when it's in the hands of
We went from normal life, healthy child to acute lymphoblastic leukemia, or B-cell ALL. The St. Jude team came up to get CJ via ambulance. It was a little bit of a scary drive. There was a time where the storms were really heavy. Shortly after that, I noticed a rainbow. It meant that there was hope. We were driving into hope. St. Jude gave us a hope that we didn't know was possible. I truly can't even imagine not having St. Jude in our lives.
I knew that it was really bad and I had a lot of questions, but I knew that everything was gonna be okay.
St. Jude saved everything that matters to us. I don't know that we'd have CJ without them. I am beyond grateful.
My hopes are I could work with St. Jude.
To have hope is to have St. Jude. To have hope is to have your child healthy, and we have that because of St. Jude.
You can help kids fight childhood cancer. Please become a St. Jude Partner in Hope today by visiting musicgives.org.
Businesses that have ties to governments that have nefarious purposes with regards to their opposition to the United States, but also, moreover, the level of influence that these platforms can have on shaping public perception, opinion, and the way in which foreign influence campaigns can heavily warp reality in the United States and spread a lot of information that's just simply not true, a lot of news that is meant to divide us. And so right now, I think that a lot of the questions are lingering around the power which these platforms yield, not necessarily the information that is gathered through technology, as we know, tends to be the case, regardless of what platform it is or who is running the platform. That's just kind of how a lot of these technologies work.
And Sam, as I understand, TikTok is developing an app that is meant to kind of circumvent these rules, the M2 app. How could this app redefine U.S. digital sovereignty?
If we were to see a sale, if we were to see some sort of deal that shifts power back into the hands of the United States, that a lot of Americans would, in this space, in the technology and digital privacy space, would feel a lot more comfort than we have in recent years, particularly since the 2016 election. There's a lot of questions with regards to Russian bots and all that scandal. And then over the past decade, questions with regards to the influence of China, the influence of Qatar, the influence of Iran, other countries. I think that this would be a huge move towards, better securing our dominance and influence over the internet, and its role in us being a country with free speech rights, us being a country with contrasting viewpoints and contest of ideas that we don't see in foreign dictatorships. It would be a huge swing towards a more open discourse than if it were to be in the hands of other parties.
Another thing I'm thinking about is back 50 years ago, there was a race going on, the space race, and everyone wanted dominance in the space. And of course, it was the United States and the Soviet Union or Russia trying to say who can put the first satellite, who can put the first man, who can put the first man on the moon. And everyone was rushing. And America won that. And that spurred a lot of development in technology and infrastructure over the next 50 years. And now we see the new space is the digital space, the internet space. And I think part of that race is who's going to control not only cyberspace, but specifically this whole digital universe, the center of which is social media in general, and in particular TikTok. What does this tell us, this race, especially between the US and China, which were already adversarial? What does it tell us about the nature of the digital race that the US and China are embarking upon?
Yeah, I think this is just another domain that sits alongside, obviously, the development of artificial intelligence, the use of new and improved means of telecommunications, use of fiber optics, 5G, now, Starlink satellites potentially. This is just another domain in which, our digital connection, we are in competition and growth and innovation. And I think that one of the things that has made TikTok really stand out is it quickly was able to displace a huge dominance that one or two of America's biggest firms had over the social media space for a number of years, by innovating and creating the new video, that's algorithm. It's just very innovative technology. So I think what this will show, if it's offloaded into this American format or some other deal is reached, is most likely there will be continued updates and iterations both to that platform and to other platforms, and that the competition will really be centered at home. And I think we'll see a lot of Americans try to compete with it. I still think, regardless of whether or not a deal is made, there's going to be an effort both by Meta and Twitter and other platforms that currently exist, but also new platforms and new entrepreneurs to try to create the next iteration of this, try to understand what humans currently want and how to serve them as customers is always front of mind to tech innovators. And I think that will continue. And I think these things are never stable. It is always evolving on a daily basis.
This is Viewpoint Alabama on the Alabama Radio Network. My name is John Mountain. I'm speaking with Sam Raus. He is the David Boaz Resident Writing Fellow at Young Voices about the future of social media. We're talking about TikTok, but I guess the larger issue here is social media as a whole. And we spoke a bit about government involvement because it is the government laws that are going to shape the way TikTok is dealt with when we talk about the looming bans. But at the same time, Congress always seems like it's not 2 steps, but 10 steps behind technology in keeping up with things. Sometimes the laws they create are archaic. Sometimes if they don't address the real issue, oftentimes the innovators just create ways around the laws and the laws are ineffective. How is Congress able to keep up with this, to keep our data safe and moreover our discourse safe? Because I think there's a lot of influence being exerted by outside forces that might not have our best interest in mind.
One of the most important things we always reference when considering policy regarding technology is Congress should be taking a light touch that addresses the misuse and particularly the harms that people see with regards to prosecuting bad actors, with regards to addressing disparities in access to information and opportunity. It's really not a good idea when we try to set up these regulatory frameworks to prevent things preemptively, to try to intervene in the decision-making processes of these businesses and how they serve their customers. I think that there's going to be a lot of questions in the coming years regarding the role that AI and algorithmic processes, and we're already seeing questions with regards to dynamic pricing and other new technologies that lawmakers are going to try to insert their opinions on rather than letting services serve the customers and address instances of serious crime, serious threats to our national security, loss of data and privacy rights. I think those are the most important things. I think that some of these other topics are used as kind of frivolous ways to wage fights between different competing factions and different competing interests in these fields, and it ultimately does not serve the everyday American in the way that it should.
Sam, in your writings, you mention your solution is one of decentralization rather than bans. Explain how decentralization would work rather than a ban when it comes to addressing the concerns that we have about TikTok.
The central question to this is the ownership of the platform at the end of the day. And I think that there were legitimate arguments and concerns brought about to try to force this out of the hands of businesses that have connections with the CCP. I have no doubt about that. Where we're at with it now, particularly with the legal questions around it as this administration, is something needs to be done. There needs to be an agreement made, and it's in the best interest of American consumers and America's economy that we see a sale made, some sort of agreement made with regards to the storing of the data, the central ownership of the platforms, and the connections between the governance of the platform, it being still ran by a private company, but we know that's not exactly the case in China right now. But centering it around the business dealings rather than continuing to go down this theoretical political path that has just not produced the results we want to see in the past year and not forced this issue to a head in the way that it needs to be, is probably our best way forward at this point.
Sam, I'm looking back at this from a historical context, and I can remember probably like 25 years ago, this file sharing website popped up called Napster. And if you're not familiar, if you're not old enough to remember this, the concept of Napster was you had all your music back in the day on CDs. Your whole library was on CDs. And what you would do is you would upload your entire library to your local hard drive on your computer. And then you had this program you downloaded onto your computer called Napster. You would go online to Napster and you could see everybody else who's online, and you could see what music they had, and they could see what music you had. And you would pick somebody, I want Master of Puppets by Metallica, and you'd find which one you want. There'd be like 30 of them there, and you'd find the one that had the best sample rate probably, and maybe from a more trusted source, and then hopefully somebody with a good connection, because you don't want to try and download it over dial-up. But that's how people were getting their music. This caused a real problem in the recording industry, because all these artists and all these record producers said, hey, we're not getting paid. They're getting music for free. And so the government stepped in and said, we'll do something about that. They shut down Napster. And then right behind it came LimeWire. And they shut that down. Right behind it came Kazaa and BitTorrent and all these other things where you were able to share content. And the solution was nobody was getting paid. So all of a sudden we introduced a way for them to monetize, for them to digitally get paid for the music they distributed. And lo and behold, we had iTunes and we had all of these other Sony Music and all these other distributors that came up with, here's a way you can pay us. You get the content, we get the money. It's better content. We get paid. Everybody wins. I'm wondering how long before somebody finds a business strategy that can successfully use market forces to regulate, to control the way that we're doing social media, more so than what's right now just an advertiser-based platform, because I've always believed that in a situation where the product is free, you are the product. And in that situation, people might be unwillingly becoming losers in the equation of giving up what is theirs to get content for their own personal enjoyment.
By taking a lighter touch approach and letting these innovations spur, letting the situation play out in a way on the digital space. Look, there are a lot of people that are concerned around the information being shared, the truthfulness of it, different distortions in our political context, propaganda. And so they've opted to use platforms that they think are frankly better aligned with their values, whether that be people on the right using Truth Social or other platforms like that, or people on the left that have been moving to Blue Sky, who have, want a more regulated, a more rules-based platform. And ultimately that's a byproduct of consumer choice and market innovation, not of government regulation trying to dictate what the best outcome is. And I have some concerns about that from the fracturing of society and the polarization it can perpetuates, but it is ultimately our choice in what products we each use and what we are looking for as a consumer. And so I think that by letting this flow through the free marketplace, and in this case, letting the video platforms be free of political bias, whether that be foreign or domestic, and then flourish in the years to come, I think, we will certainly see a lot of evolution, a lot of change in what kind of platforms are being used, why, and how they best serve us. And they're continuing the conversation around how these tools play a role in our lives and the good and bad between that. That's fine. I think that's a very reasonable conversation to be had. It's a concern with government regulation and the potential for censorship and stifling of business opportunity and free expression, where this gets into really concerning waters.
It's one of those situations where when the writers, the framers of our Constitution wrote it some 250 years ago, we just weren't really thinking about these sort of things. And so we have to kind of interpret it in where we live now. Sam, definitely this is an issue that we're not going to solve in the next 15 minutes, but I wanted to thank you so much for being my guest. And for more information on any of the things we talked about, your work is available where?
The listeners can follow me on X at SamRaus1, and you can also find more of my writing on the Young Voices website.
And Raus is spelled R-A-U-S. Sam, thank you so much for joining me. This is Viewpoint Alabama on the Alabama Radio Network.
Thank you for having me.
You've been listening to Viewpoint Alabama, a public affairs program from the Alabama Radio Network. The opinions expressed on Viewpoint Alabama are not necessarily those of the staff, management, or advertisers of this station.
We went from normal life, healthy child to acute lymphoblastic leukemia, or B-cell ALL. The St. Jude team came up to get CJ via ambulance. It was a little bit of a scary drive. There was a time where the storms were really heavy. Shortly after that, I noticed a rainbow. It meant that there was hope. We were driving into hope. St. Jude gave us a hope that we didn't know was possible. I truly can't even imagine not having St. Jude in our lives.
I knew that it was really bad and I had a lot of questions, but I knew that everything was gonna be okay.
St. Jude saved everything that matters to us. I don't know that we'd have CJ without them. I am beyond grateful.
My hopes are I could work with St. Jude.
To have hope is to have St. Jude. To have hope is to have your child healthy, and we have that because of St. Jude.
You can help kids fight childhood cancer. Please become a St. Jude Partner in Hope today by visiting musicgives.org.